The UDRcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDRcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDRcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. Okay, the mics are on. We're ready to rock. Well, ask me that question.
I mean, it has to do with what we were just chatting about, which is, guys kind of taking over, right? We've sponsored enough guys, been sober for a good clip of years, been able to cycle through a lot of guys, and now some of those guys have time. Like, I have a sponsee coming up on 6 years, which is just absolutely hilarious. This guy's almost been sober as long as I've been sober, And so I know that there was a time where me and you worked very close quarters together. That's obviously changed just in growth and experience. But I want to know, has your step 3 changed? I know that step 3, there's not much non-negotiables in that step as opposed to like a 5 when you take a guy through a 5. There's non-negotiables. 1, there's non-negotiables. And a non-negotiable is that you cannot get through that chapter or you cannot talk about that step without hitting certain points. That is the chapter. That is the step. And step 3, at least when it comes to the prayer, there's some gray area in there. There's some things you could get away with not doing. There's some things you could kind of, almost do it. There's certain things you could get away with doing it on your own, right? And so my question is has the step 3 changed much in the last number of years?
I would say no, the step 3 hasn't changed a lot. When I take a person up to the step 3 prayer, I get them on their knees. That's been that way for probably a minimum of 4 years now, maybe 5 years, probably 5 years. It's been on your knees. I do get them to say the step 3 prayer right out of the big book. And then I get them to say the step 3 prayer in their own words, both of which I have stolen from you. I used to just say the step 3 prayer sitting in our chairs, blah, blah, blah. But I found on the knees was very much a willingness that is created through the humbleness and humility of getting on your knees and doing something you've never done. What I also like to do is I will get the person to say everything out loud. Almost all sponsees I work with, I try to get them to pray before we start any sessions out loud. And why I do that is because what I've seen for years at meetings and working with people and getting to know people is everyone loves their God. Everyone's really tight with their God. And then my take is okay, how tight are you? Let's see you speak to God out loud. And I'm not ever going to force anyone to, but I think it's a great step to see how much do you really connect with your God. And if you're not comfortable with sharing, can we talk about why? And I almost always have found that it has to do with being embarrassed, not only to themselves, to with being in front of me. And so there's a huge self-worth thing there. It's emotional insecurity. And my take is if you're really comfortable with you and you're really comfortable with God, then you will speak the words out loud. So we do that step 3 prayer. But then I always go back to the prayer and then we break it down. And I talk to them about, okay, what does this first line mean to you? Build with me and do with me as thou wilt. And a lot of people give you an answer, it's fairly surface-ish. But when I go into it with them, I'm like, you just made a commitment to your God of whatever understanding that is, to build with you and to do with you as thou wilt. And I really want to explain what that looks like and what it means. And it means there's going to be some fucking pain. It means that you're going to go through a rebuilding process. And any building or anything that gets rebuilt has to go through a demolition stage. And the demolition of self is what we're talking about, has to be done through time. And when you make this commitment to this power that is unseen, it has far more reaching implications that your conscious mind can even understand. And there's a lot of where the problem arises from, the problems we think arise out of ourselves, that's deep down inside you. And some of the reconstruction is coming from places that you can't see, touch, feel, or even understand. And some of that pain before you grow is going to come heavy and hard. Relieve me of the bondage of self. Well, you're tied to self. And through the step 3 reading, the actor, selfish self-centeredness that we think is the root of our troubles, we must be rid of it or it kills us. God makes that possible. So I kind of tie all of the reading into that bondage of self. And the thing about talking about bondage of self in the step 3 and in the step 3 prayer is you can only go so surfacey because the bondage of self isn't really revealed until the step 4 at the first level. Or I'm going to say maybe the second level, because maybe that step 3 reading kind of gives you a little bit of a level of that. But the real bondage of self comes through the following steps and really understanding 6 and 10 later. And, take away my difficulties. And typically you got to understand, Jesse, that most of the guys that I'm sponsoring, most guys or women that I'm sponsoring, they're not wet alcoholics. They're not brand new off the street. So these people are coming to me for this level up type of process. They want something better and deeper. And so I guess I got a bit of a reputation for that. And so they come here. And then when we get to the really take away my difficulties, I always say your difficulties are your defects of character, and your difficulties cause you all your problems. And it says, as victory over these things may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Take away these difficulties so that victory, the word victory, I'm like, what does that mean? Well, they don't really know. I'm like, there's a fight. It's insinuating there's a fight here. And the fight is within your own self, in relinquishing these difficulties, these defects that tie you to the bondage of self. And that is part of the building and doing with you as thou wilt. And as you relinquish these difficulties and you have victory over them with the help of your Creator, God, you will be able to serve thy people and thy will. And where are these difficulties actually fought off? Well, maybe in the first set of steps, it's 4 and 5 and 6 and whatever. But really, I believe it's in the step 10 is where you're really relinquishing these difficulties. And the principle behind step 10 is perseverance, which means to fight through. So you're having your fight there with these difficulties in the 10. And you become victorious through persistent, consistent commitment to follow the process, the exact process. And in another fellowship, the principle is discipline. Step 10 is discipline. And in the other fellowship, discipline, it is like doing something whether you want to or not, which is part of like grooving the shit into our life to have it become a working part of our mind. And so I kind of do talk a little bit about that kind of thing if I'm working with somebody that's been around. But if they're a wet alcoholic, dude, a lot of that discussion is like minimized because I find that they're not ready. Very similar to if I'm working with a wet alcoholic, I don't go into the depths of the step 6 that much either. I might read it, I might talk about it, but the real effect of the step 6 comes after they've been sober a while and they've worked the step 10, 11, and the 12. And then after like 8 months or a year, then the step 6 means something because they're convinced that any life ran on self-will is hardly a success. And then we really hammer out the 6 and the 7 again because they've usually gone through fucking some pain by then. And in that step 7, it says this gaining a new perspective is unbelievably painful. It was only by repeated humiliations at the end of a long road marked by successive defeats and humiliations that we saw humility as something more than a condition of groveling despair. Then I tie the step 3 prayer back into it. That's the building and doing with you as at will. That is the relinquishment of the bondage of self. That is taking away these difficulties so that this victory over them can take you to a different perspective. And that perspective, like we discussed in another talk we did, is that attitude of God. It's love. And God is no longer the Bush League pinch hitter. He's actually, of myself, I am nothing. The Father, the God that I rely on, this power that I can't see, it does the work as long as I'm willing to align with it. So that's pretty much what I do.
That's the 3. And, you know, like clearly, as we chatted about many times before, there is a difference between, you know, a retread and a wet alcoholic, right? There is also a difference between, you know, a wet alcoholic and, you know, a deeper understanding type of session, which generally I call a sponsor's point of view, right? And this would be a guy's, you know, maybe 3-4 years, does sponsor, does do the deal, you know, has a pretty solid base understanding. We're just looking at, you know, digging deeper, right? As opposed to a retread who is, you know, fresh sobriety, but has been in and out for 10, 20 years, right? Then a wet alcoholic typically is a guy who's never even come to the program, brand new to the whole thing, shaken, dying of alcoholism, right? And it doesn't matter in each case. You know, I had a pretty interesting situation that happened the other week where I'm sitting down with a guy, he's a grand sponsee of mine, looking for a sponsor's point of view, so a deeper understanding. And, you know, I had him do the step 3 prayer the way I have every man do the step 3 prayer without exception. It's been this way for many years. I'd probably say I've been doing this 6 years of my recovery, like almost right out of the gate was this way. And, you know, I sponsor most men in my car, so they go to the bumper of the car always without exception. They will say the step 3 prayer. And just maybe the last number of years, 4 or 5 years, has been, you know, voice it without reservation, right? Which is that you say it in your own words, you know. And I know that we've discussed this many times where I'll pull the car, you know, there's a number of Tim Hortons in the city that I work at, mainly in the South, do all my sponsorship in the car, and I'll pull right in front of this establishment. So there's people, you know, there's onlookers there, you know, and then I get him out. And, you know, this guy was talking about how he doesn't do that. And I thought it was a very interesting take. Not interesting as in what he was telling me was blowing my hair back, because that did not happen. But what I thought was interesting is that his opinion of the bumper step 3 was as if that was a common thing that's done. Was his opinion, was like, you know, he talked of it as if he was talking about, you know, doing your step 5 with a priest. Like the bumper step 3 was such a known thing and people do it as if it was doing your step 3 with a priest. And he had formulated his opinion based upon the bumper step 3 as if he was formulating an opinion of, you know, a guy going to treatment, or a guy doing his step 5 with a priest, or like well-known things that guys generally do.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so interesting because, of course, that was adopted by myself, and it was adopted from my sponsor making me get down on my knees in a Boston pizza. And so it was a game day, the whole 9 yards. I mean, me and this gentleman, right in the middle of Boston pizza, got down on our fucking knees right at a table. And, he didn't have me voice it without reservation, but he did have me read the prayer right then and there. And, is there a bit of humiliation there? Maybe. I mean, that's not really the point. I mean, it is meant to be humbling, sure. But, in the latter steps, there's nothing short of, humbling actions that a man has to take in the servitude of this spirit, right? So really, it's more the start of that. But what I thought was interesting was that he had an opinion of this thing as if this is like a very common thing that men make men do in the program. And I guess that maybe speaks to the amount of sponsees I have with continuity in what I've done to them and what they do to other men. I've heard other guys, most men, when I hear what they have to say about it years after, is always interesting. How these guys are beaten, shaken, dying of alcoholism. They have no other option. They think I'm a fucking absolute loon for making them do this. And maybe I am, for making them do this. But, of course, where it brings them to is always, the most interesting, right? I find that the step 3 is best captured in the way that I've done it. And that's why I haven't changed it. And when he was giving me his opinion of what he does, there's not much data on it, so we'll see if it works out. But I just thought that was interesting as he spoke of the bumper step 3 as if this was a common thing done in the program.
And did he end up doing it?
Oh yeah, he did it 100% because he knows that's the deal, right? He knows that is how I do it. There's no shock in that. He's a grand sponsee of mine, so he knows that that's how it's done. That's how it's done by my hand. He did that, but we had a conversation afterwards in which he had kind of, explained some of these things, and he had said that, in fact, another sponsee of mine doesn't do that with other men. And I thought it was interesting to get their point of view on it, because that's kind of the point, right? Like we had spoken, when we took our break here, is that, I give them the template. There's certain non-negotiable things they can't fuck with, but there are a lot of things they can put their own flair on. And that's one of those things they can do that, right? Mm-hmm. It's just more so what I've found most effective as a blanket solution to that piece of what exactly we're going to do. And because I sponsor enough guys in the car, it just makes sense that we would go right to the fucking bumper of that car. And that's where you do your prayers.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that we were chatting about on the break was how through our early years of recovery, and, we connected fairly early in our recovery as well, you and I as friends. And as we grew in this program together, we were kind of forced to figure a lot of this shit out through our own searching in the literature and in the books. And I don't even remember really relying on many other people like you see today. Like today, there's a lot of people leaning on a lot of people, and you hear that God-centered 12-step pillar word, which is, what we coined, and it's very popular. I've heard it now in the States and everywhere. So it's kind of cool. Give ourselves a little pat on the back for kind of bringing that in. But besides the point, we didn't have what I see the program has now on all of the good kind of components. There's a lot of talk of God-centered 12-step pillars. There's a lot of talk about, the directions lie within the step 10 and within the literature. There's a lot of talk of, sponsoring and helping others and being of service through your home group and all these kind of things. And, I maybe heard when I was new, get a home group and go to meetings. Didn't really hear much more than that. So what I'm getting at is the version of what I see in the program today is much different than the version that you and I kind of were in. And we had to figure a lot of this shit out ourselves, right? And relying and kind of discerning it off of each other through our fucking pain of experiences of life and us fucking up was the biggest catalyst to us understanding this. And also sponsorship has probably taught me more about any of this than anything. You had mentioned, in some ways, the people that are growing up in the program around us here, they're almost spoiled, right? And then they almost just take it for granted, and they don't even have a clue of what it could be like. And I find like Calgary, and you had mentioned earlier, Alberta recovery in general is pretty high level, and you don't really know what you got until you're put somewhere else, right? So you got any takes on that shit?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like we had chatted about that, about the, almost being spoiled. I mean, the simple fact is that, any guy that I work with has the experience of me and you, right? I mean, in the time that me and you were developing, we had collabed our collective experience. So however many men I've sponsored, you've sponsored the same amount as me, but the collective data is double, right? And so that's why it's become so effective, I believe, is because it's right from the book, and it's properly analyzing the book and breaking that down on what it says. But then also how that's received, what works and what doesn't work when I'm working with a new man, right? How do I convey that? How do I convey a 1 to get the direct result that the book looks for? How do I convey the whole 12 to the point where he feels the need to sponsor? All that stuff, eh? So we're talking about like a megamind. You remember we had chatted about that maybe a year or two ago. And, that's what we've been able to do. Not only that, is everything that's come to me throughout the number of years, I've always bounced off of Bill. And Bill has done likewise to make sure that it's not fucking complete nonsense. Because that's also possible too, eh? Just because it comes to my mind or I think that I'm putting things together doesn't mean that it's necessarily so. Ran into a couple of those. But for the most part, what we've done is that we've tried things out. We've seen what works and what does not work. And then we've shared that data. And so, we did not have anybody, I didn't have anybody developed, and I know Bill didn't. The original men who sponsored us gave us enough at that time. But I believe also, with newer individuals in the program, if they're desperate enough, I mean, you could give them the barest bones and they will sort out some answers, much like Roland Hazard did is what we did. And, Bill's talking about certain things being coined and that type of stuff. I find that to be very interesting. I mean, I don't really believe that I'm unique. I fucking totally, that's a big thing. Why that's a big thing is that if I'm unique, then what I've done here can't be replicated. And I don't believe in that at all. I believe in having to replicate this. And, I'm considered a good talker and a more polished speaker now. And that was a little bit of a gift that I was given. But fuck, like I have some sponsees that are different cultures that have accents. One in particular that has a very heavy accent. What I didn't know then when I sponsored this gentleman to what I know now is that this guy didn't understand half of the fucking things that I was saying. That's the God's honest truth. I realized that today, and I didn't recognize it then. But this guy has he has a language barrier and a culture barrier. And I had heard him speak a couple weeks ago. And I walked away from that. And this guy just copies me fucking verbatim. Exactly what I would have said is exactly what he said. And it was step 10. And I thought to myself, if this guy could replicate what we've done here out of the book, then any man can, And I've had a lot of men who, maybe aren't very loud, who are more on the passive side of things, still be able to bat at a consistent sharing average of 6s, which is all a guy needs. Being able to replicate this is very important to the individual who comes into this program. And so the program has to be presented in a very common sense, practical way. And that's what me and Bill were just chatting about this. I mean, that's what I've been trying to do for many years, is to try and explain this in such a common sense way that, yes, you could have this too.
And part of the reason I think that you're successful as a sponsor, as a mentor, as a person who's growing in this program is in large part because you've seen and you know how much this has changed your own life. And then based on the numbers of men that you've sponsored, you've seen how this has changed their lives. So we have two areas of data collection, basically three. You have your own experience, you have the experience of others through sponsorship, and then you have my collective experience in those same two areas. And, you know, it talks about in the book, his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect. Your whole deportment shouts at the prospect. And as you're sharing that deportment, your body language and all of your being is shooting that energy of love and like truth. And that hits the subconscious in ways that ego and pride can't do. And that's really important in the messaging. And as you work with the guys you work with and you kind of see, you know, these guys replicating a lot of what you're doing, at some point it switches from like, okay, I'm copying somebody to I'm living what they showed me in this book. And then their own voice expresses it in the way that is true to them.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part of this, right? And you and I both know we can only take guys so far. Eventually, they got to go on their own with their own relationship with God, and that's kind of the deal, and that's an expected thing from us. Kind of takes me to a thought that just came up. So a lot of the people that I work with, like I do, like I'm going to say almost all this work that I do with people, I do it intuitively. And of my own ego, I try to remove that out of there. Does it sneak in there here and there? Fuck, of course it does. But I try not to have that, and I try to be centered when I'm working with people. And through the whole process of working with people, it might be months and months of helping them grasp and develop a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. And I almost always tell them, like, the things that I do, you might not understand, but I ask you to just kind of follow my lead to the best of your ability and know that I do the things that I do for a reason. And then honestly, Jess, I don't even know why I do everything I do for whatever reason, because I think a lot of it does come intuitively based on the numbers of personalities that I've worked with, based on the number of like psyches that I've been able to get into and get into these dark parts of people and build the compassion and see what drives us. And I just kind of get a feel for what I think is right with certain people. But then I find that sometimes, this isn't often, but it is every now and then, and that sometimes they get down the road and I've helped them, or you've helped them so much that they end up going, you know what? I know what's best. I know what's best for me. And then they think the things that I'm doing with them are fucking all wrong. And then, you know, and oftentimes, and this has happened recently, it's like, okay, then you know what? Then do it your way, man. And if I'm not the right fit for a sponsor, fuck, I'm not holding you here. You're not my hostage. Fuck, get a new sponsor. Like, and that's the thing, right? And I don't mind doing that. And for example, it's funny today, I've been working with this one guy 3 years. He came here today and he just, you know, he was kind of shy about it. And he said, you know, I'm going to take on this new sponsor and try some of his way. I'm like, fuck, that's amazing, bro. Fuck, go for it. I was like right before you got here. And, dude, that's what I want, right? I want people to grow and learn and try certain things. And, and that's what I love. You know, there's another part of that conversation that I could make a podcast out of, but I'll just stay on the topic here. And have you noticed down the road, as you've sponsored certain people through maybe their first set of steps or second set of steps, that they just go, you know what, I'm fucking good. I'm good from here. I don't really agree with what you're saying anymore, and then they just move on?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has happened. It's by no means the rule, and I don't think it is with you either. But it has happened for sure, where you pick a guy up, you give him all the chips, he starts, moving in that direction, starts getting some pretty good benefits. He thinks he has a high level of understanding, which typically he does not. It's more of like, I always find it to be more of like a kind of delusion thing. Alcoholism looks like anything but alcoholism. I've seen quite often guys will switch from me to a much softer approach, like almost the complete opposite. Like if I am to see the sponsor that, they had kind of moved to, they're always softer, always without exception. So, the harder approach gets them to where they need to be. And maybe they think the softer approach will help them in, their spirituality. And that's okay. The only thing that, is always a red flag is that if I just get them 12 stepped, then maybe what'll happen is I'll give them a semi-annual, annual house cleaning, half a year to a year down the road. And then they end up going to, do the 12 steps again, right? They're not sponsoring. Their step 11 is wavered, they're not sponsoring, their step 10 is wavered, and their step 11 is non-existent. And then instead of pointing within themselves, they'll point at me, they'll point at whatever they need to, and then they think it's another set of steps, right? So what they got out of the first set with me was relief. They got some tangible actions which they put into place, right? They stopped doing the work. They got a semi-annual or annual house cleaning. That gave them some relief. And now instead of looking at themselves, they kind of point at everything else. Alcoholism looks like anything but alcoholism, and they think it's another set of steps. And really all it is selfishness, typically, right? Self is bled back into their life from the first set of steps to this semi-annual or annual house cleaning. They got a little bit of relief on that again, then it bled in again. They think they need to focus on themselves. All these assholes believe that it's all me, right? Focus on me and focus on me. And it's like, no, dude, I don't want to fucking, like a lot of the times when I do the sponsor's point of view, I'm very aware of how many times they've done the steps and in what length of time. And I've pushed guys away that have just done a set of steps. And now they want to do a set of steps with me. And I don't fucking think so. How many guys you sponsoring? Oh, you haven't ever sponsored, but you're 3 years sober and you've done 3 sets of steps. Right? I don't think so.
Dude, I see that as being one of the biggest manifestations of self, and cunning, baffling, and powerful. Yeah, it's really cunning. And we think that, or they think, not me, they think that the solution lies within more inner work, when the solution lies through service to others and expanding on your meditation, hopefully working on your step 10. And carrying out that 12-step active service. And sponsoring is a huge component. It's probably, I always say the 12 steps give you a lot, or they give me a lot. But the one component, working with others, will give you everything. Right? And I believe that to be true. I wanted to kind of backtrack a quick sec here. I had a sponsee of mine who's now 3 years sober. They called me and they were talking about one of their sponsees. And they were like, I just got a call from one of my sponsees, and, they had kind of ditched me a little while ago, and she was cool with that. And, they just called me, and I think they were just calling me to tell me how good their life was. And like to try to like smush it in my face a bit that now that I've left you, my life is so good and blah, blah, blah. And I know, and I shared with them that my buddy Jesse has had that exact same experience on numerous occasions, or at least a couple. I haven't had that exact experience, so can you talk about that?
I've had that happen many times, because it is such a hard approach with these men that like they look at the hard approach, they think they can find an easier, softer way. I mean, many have not, but there are a couple that have. And one in particular, I had just seen him not too long ago where he didn't do this. This is more because a lot of men will treat it like a bad breakup. That's just a simple fact. And I'll tell them, like, if I have to let you go or you let me go, this isn't a bad breakup, bro. You know what I mean? If I see it's not going to be weird, whatever. I just kind of let him know that, you know. But then much like a bad breakup, some of these guys will try and act like, you know, they're in a better position and, oh my God, this new guy's blowing my fucking hair back and, you know, whatever, and this type of stuff. And, you know, one in particular did that, you know, kind of early on when this had happened, as I had given him some direction. And the direction that I gave him was not only from the dad of me, but Bill, where, you know, guys will go out of town. It's very common. Guy wants to go out of town very early on. He does do so drunk, you know. And in this case, by the grace of God, this gentleman hadn't done that. But for the first couple, probably the first maybe 6 months, he had called me every month just to let me know how good it is and all this other shit. And like I said, he's still sober today. There was another one who tried to do that, but he's just such a fucking mess that he just can't even do it. So, you know, as soon as I let him go this time around, maybe a couple months ago, he had called me and let me know how good things were. And then as soon as he did that, he was back on the streets. But yeah, there's that situation in particular, both those situations in particular that always come into mind. But I've had that happen a couple times. And why that is like I said, because I am so hard in the direction and in, you know, these non-negotiables and what is and what isn't early on, that, you know, these guys really try and saw it out. For the guys who aren't serious, they really try and saw it out, you know, an easier, softer way.
And you say early on, so you're pretty stringent on these non-negotiables for,
Yeah.
I guess it also depends on the individual and what you know about them, but on the average, how long are you really stringent, and when do you let off a little bit?
I mean, typically 5, but, you know,
Step 5.
Step 5, yeah. But, I mean, even then, you know, there's some guys who will get some sympathy. Like, for example, a man who has a wife and a family, he'll get sympathy at time, right? So, you know, when I give a step 4, 2 weeks resentments, 1 week sex and fear conduct, if he has a family, then, you know, I could give him an extra week in any one of those areas, right? I'll give him a lot of grace. But if it's a guy in a treatment center, he gets absolutely no fucking grace. It's probably one of the guys that'll be, that's the type of situation will probably be most tough.
Okay. How about on long-term sponsorship? So you're done the steps usually within the first 4 months or so, and then you build this relationship with them or not. But the ones that you do, knowing their defective character, knowing how they are you still stringent on them down the road for the next like 6 months, year, 5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely lighter than it was, you know, but I'm still pretty, I mean, that's why these guys call me to get fucking smacked around. You know, I haven't, there's nothing about the dynamic of sponsor and sponsee that really enables this man to call me just to see how I'm doing. Although men do that, at no point does that dynamic change. The dynamic is still in place years and years after.
Mm-hmm. But you might let down some of those walls and build more of a friendship with certain ones, right?
Definitely. I mean, you know, as we start talking more about career and we start talking more about passions and loves and we start talking, you know, where this guy's doing all the right things and he's calling me about, you know, more positive things. He's not really calling me too much about his own program. Definitely calling me about sponsorship things for sure. I mean, that's really, sponsorship is what ties all these guys back to me, no matter how long you have time wise.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a sponsee of mine, you're generally still calling me about that. Well, once a month, give or take.
So if you were to say like your style versus my style of sponsorship, what would the big difference be between your style and my style? Even though we're very similar, what's the differences?
Aggressive and non-negotiables. Like you would be, you know, like you said that you know, operate a lot in intuition, which means that you have the ability more to tailor make the sessions to the individual. And I do that to a certain degree, as in, we're going through this chapter. I know a little bit of this guy's background. There's going to be things that are pointed out to me, that I feel inspired to go over, right? And spend a little bit more time where I wouldn't have spent a little bit more time with the next guy, right? In this certain piece. And there is a little bit of that, but I am more aggressive with time. I am more aggressive with boundaries. I am more aggressive, non-negotiables in the sex conduct, a fuck of a lot more than you are. I know that is fact. And then, I would just say our aggression levels.
Okay. And then, so what do you think about this take? So here's one of my takes on our differences, and I agree with all of those. You really try to work with the person and really try to help shape them to be effective in the world of the material, to be really productive members of society, to work in with the people and integrate with the people in a way that is really productive to all people around them, which is great, right? And I would say, so the big difference is you sponsor for the result where this person can really pack into the stream of life and be humble in his own place in society and do this in a humble way. And then I would say I sponsor people more to be spiritual spearheads, to like maybe try to get out of the world of the material in a way.
Interesting.
And take it to a different level and rely solely on the intuition and God. And sometimes that means leaving the family. Sometimes that means leaving their relationship, whereas you'll work more on trying to keep them in the relationship. I'll work more on the relationship with themselves, and are you selling out pieces of your soul? And what does that look like? And how does that make you feel? And like, maybe that career isn't what you want. Whereas sometimes you'll try to really shape them, try to help them with their career. And I will try to help them reveal that maybe that's not the path. Maybe let's look at your life. Let's look at your soul. Let's look at your defects. Let's see if that's where you maybe don't want to be. Right? Would you say that's a difference also?
Yeah, I'd say that that's probably, like the world of the material and these men. I want them to brush off you're right. I mean, I really want them to be back into the world of the material, but have a proper relationship with it. And that's a very large part of the building a character is, I feel that this man's 20 years in whatever field that may be, I feel that he could be very effective if he is present in that field. And of course, it doesn't always work out. I mean, as well as I do that the relationship these men get into generally are crooked right out of the gate. Whether the individual that the gentleman's with is alcoholic or not, the damage, potential cheating, whole bunch of stuff. It's very difficult to come back from that. More often than not, they just spoke love with their lips and believe what they say so they can hide lust in a dark corner of their minds. They did that 20 years ago, and they've been telling themselves a fucking lie ever since, right? And I'd say that that's most common, but I am not very big on, the potential repercussions that come from a divorce, or generally what happens is this man's not making any decisions for a year after I've sponsored them. And I find that, and that's your 12th step, the year after that, packing into the stream of that relationship, packing into the stream of the family unit, that I'm able to see what is and what isn't. And so is the other guy. Like I had said, we want to do absolutely everything we can on our end, that if it is to end, he knows without a fucking doubt in his mind that there isn't one more thing he could have done, And then I find he could properly move on. I'm running into that with one of my sponsees in Christmas. We're going to be looking at making some of those moves where a relationship of X amount of years and children is, that's going to be over, which is a sad situation. At the same time, it'd been a year, this guy fucking packing into this family unit, year packing into the relationship and whatnot. I'd say that is fairly accurate, where I want him to be a productive member of society.
And another thing, and I'll give you full props for this. Like, as I tailor more of my sponsorship through intuitive thought and maybe not as rigid as the relationship goes on, there's certain non-negotiables that I'm totally rigid about through the initial months, and depending on the person, maybe a year or even more. But as we build the relationship, and hopefully they're building that relationship with their own God and basically authentic self, I loosen the rein a little bit. And there's been many times where we have chatted and shared data, and I've even said, okay, this is the situation. What do you think? You give me your opinion, and it's pretty hard and fast line. And whereas I'm like, I got some play in that decision, and I usually, lean to having the play and letting the person, make that own choice and leave it up to let's see what happens. Whereas you're not, and you will usually give me the outcome of what you think might happen. And I'll say more times than I'd like to admit, you're fucking bang on. Right. And that's something that I've noticed about you is like your knowingness of the result of what will come through whatever action, and your rigidness within the discipline of how you keep people in alignment. It is pretty successful as far as the end result goes. I'm not saying that a lot of my ways haven't been successful too, because I know that we're very similar in the numbers of success of the people that we've worked with. So your way's working, my way's working, but the basic foundations is we're very, very similar. I may not get, as aggressive later. And like even with this person that, I've been working with recently, who I asked to get a new sponsor, and they've moved on. Even through those processes and many others, they don't always follow with where they need to be, reaching for more and reaching for this and trying this. And I'm just like, stay in your fucking lane. You don't need to reach and try and grab and fucking watch all these videos and try all these fucking different things, because you're at where you're at and you're still at the beginning. Just kind of stay where you're at. And to me, these are all symptoms of untreated alcoholism still, right? And a lot of that can be tied to the theory of God and this fucking direct line and this direct contact. And I just, like I said, I have a way of knowing how people are, and everything I do with intention, but they don't always see that, right? And everyone's different. But at the end of the day, I still hope everyone does the best that they can. I still hope that they become spearheads of their own creator and they try to pack into life, and then they grow. And the one thing I know that I don't do is I try not to judge somebody from a moral hilltop or from any type of spiritual hilltop. I try, because I've seen people change. I've seen people that I've really disliked change into totally different people. So I know that, and I don't know what's inside of each individual for the willingness to grow in the image and likeness of their creator. I don't know to what degree that is. It's invisible. But I do know that I have seen people do that, maybe even when I thought it wasn't going to happen. So I've learned that, fuck, I don't know. What do I really know? And so it's cool to see people grow, that maybe that relationship was soured at one point, but then you kind of come back in the fellowship of the Spirit maybe years later, right? And it's an interesting journey, this recovery life and life in general. And I think we're really lucky to have these spiritual disciplines and this program of life that we can follow, because there's a lot of normal people out there right outside this door that are struggling, dude, with the bondage of self. Their difficulties aren't taken away because they are running their life with the best of intention. But self is really running it, and they fucking suffer. And they're in these loveless relationships, and they're working for jobs they don't like. They're fucking doing things that go against the core of who they are. And fuck, it's apparent everywhere. And that's not a judgment point of view. I think that's more of a factual point of view. And I think our society, this is a topic I'd love to discuss. I don't know if today's the place, but how mental health and just the aspect of mental health is the main component of our society, and trying to work on only the mental health when I believe it's a spiritual health crisis, not a mental health crisis. I think the focus on the mental health crisis alone actually perpetuates more mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And that's what our society lives in, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, is it set up to solve the issue, though? I mean, that's like, I think that's the fundamental question. Like,
Yeah.
you're talking about, society and people being in loveless relationships. You're talking about people being, like in careers that go against who they are. Well, I mean, what is that? It's, I would say, would be decisions based in fear, coupled with decisions based in fear, coupled with decisions based in self and, maybe in pride, right? Maybe in, but I would mainly say decisions based in fear. To get a government job that pays a good pension is a fuck of a lot more secure than starting your own business, right? For example. Also too, like, like I do have a lot of sponsees that are in the recovery field, which they know what I feel about that. I think the impact would be much greater if they went back to their respected fields. That's besides the point. It does give me a little insight into, there's one in particular that is a non-for-profit that has growth projections. How does a non-for-profit trying to solve a problem have growth projections? How does a budget of 1 million last year now need to be 1.5 this year? How is the problem getting worse? How is their growth projections? And how is that considered successful? That's the problem with a lot of these programs talking about mental health. You had mentioned that you believe that the solution to the problem makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
Well, what if that's the point? I mean, it actually seems to be. What if that's the point? If you look at everything from that perspective, you start looking at mental health and things actually start clicking a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you look at it, you say, okay, if I'm trying to solve the problem, you start looking at it and you're like, okay, well, like a lot of these solutions to your problem is reliant upon this program, or it's relying upon certain government agencies, or it's relying upon this, relying upon that. And if you think to yourself, okay, well, this isn't solving shit. But if you look at the fundamental question is how can we make these people not relying on themselves? How can we make the problem not be solved? You look at it from that perspective, you're like, okay, makes a fuck of a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
Than it did, let's solve the issue. But I do want to emphasize that again, is like, how does a non-for-profit trying to solve an issue have growth projections? I find that so alarming. As soon as I heard that, just made me absolute sick. I mean, you would think, okay, last year we needed a budget of $1 million. This year we only need $750. We helped 1,000 people last year get out of poverty, right? Or helped 1,000 people last year with $1 million to be self-sufficient. They no longer need our help. Right? So instead of $1 million, we helped 1,000 people last year. We need 900,000.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know.
you would think that would make more fucking sense. At least to me, that fucking makes more fucking sense. But here we are.
Here we are.
Just Clownacy Island.
And you brought up a can of worms that we can't open today, because that will definitely be a conversation. And the question is, why would I want to solve the problem? Right? And, that kind of goes, I'm going to say it's still a spiritual question of our society, of our governments, of our businesses. It's still a spiritual question, but it lies outside the norm of what we would normally talk about here. But I think, and I know you and I have a little bit different viewpoints in that area, but I think at some point we should open up that can of worms and really ask, like, does the problem really want to be solved by the society that we live in? And if not, why? And, but yeah, I think that's for another day, which will be coming soon. I need to get you back here right away. And I also want to discuss relationships with you right away based on, your successful relationship and how it's not how that one in particularly started and has become successful, but what it was like in the early years and in your past life and what you see in sponsorship. And I'll share my own experience through sponsorship and in my past life and how, I'm coming up on 10 months in a successful relationship and what's making this one work versus, some of the debauchery I've fucking been through in relationships in recovery. Right. And you've witnessed that fucking path, but yeah. Anything else?
Yeah. I mean, I think touching upon the relationships would be good to dive into that because, diving into the relationships, like I often said, if I understood when I got into a relationship, what that actually meant and what was involved, the amount of work that was involved in keeping that moving and in keeping that growing, with another person, I fucking never would have got into it. I mean, I just did not have the ability to understand at that moment the amount of work that it took. It was pointed out to me that I've only had a relationship with myself. And I think that's often for a lot of people,
Yeah, and even these people in newer recovery, they think they have a relationship with a partner, but the relationship is still with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and in their needs and what they want. I said to my partner very early on in our relationship, it kind of hit me that what if both parties, like what if I and what if she only thought about the needs of the other person, right? What if I put 100% of my effort into the needs of the other person and she did likewise? And I asked, would that be a perfect relationship? And ever since then, we have attempted to do exactly that. And I find that whenever there's discourse in our relationship is when I'm thinking about my needs and she's thinking about likewise. And it's not very often that both parties, at least in this relationship, think about our own needs. But when we do, it's a fucking nightmare. Quite typically, it would be either her thinking about her needs or me doing that, me thinking about my needs.
Mm-hmm.
But what has been successful over the last number of years, it's been 5 years, that when it's most successful is I think about her needs and she does likewise. I don't think about my own needs in this relationship and what I need.
Mm-hmm.
Because if she is putting her action into my needs and I'm doing likewise, then there's no need for me to think about my needs. They're met.
Yeah, dude.
Right? But I mean, is that the only thing that's impossible is getting somebody else on board with that. That's the only thing that's difficult about it. If you could get your spouse on board with that and you could show them that it works through action, not through words, through action, then
which again is that blind leap of faith, right?
100 fucking percent, man, 100%. And also for the individual that is packing that amount of effort, if this individual decides that they're no longer going to do that because it's a decision and they're going to think about their needs and you're going to be packing everything into their needs and they're thinking about their needs, you will burn the fuck out so quickly.
Yeah, because it's more decisions based in self and you just can't fucking live like that.
No, you can't. I mean, because all your energy is displacing their needs and they're still clamoring for their needs to be met when you're trying to meet their needs. So it's very interesting, when you start looking at the right person. And so, when you had mentioned these guys to be, fit back in society, that's a very big piece, is the sex conduct. Protecting this man from the opposite sex and the opposite sex from this man. As he starts building the character, enough to be in a relationship. He builds this flat tire 5 or his pillars, right? He starts working on loves. He starts working on who he is, because the fundamental issue before these guys get into a relationship is they don't even know who the fuck they are, right?
Right.
And so what happens is that two half people get together in a relationship to make up a full person. And when this relationship is done, this person is losing half of who they are, and this is why it's so devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. And I don't know what your take is on this, but when I work with somebody, and let's say they have a total inability to form a true partnership with a woman, I think what I try to do is at the beginning portion of the relationship is like our relationship, sponsor, sponsee. I really emphasize how important our relationship is, right? And then in a nutshell, after our relationship is established, and that's why I believe this most recent relationship with a sponsee has failed, because that relationship, real, like true relationship, never was actually fulfilled, and self kind of got involved, and it actually ixnayed the relationship, not from my side, from their side, which is fine. But we need to build the first relationship with another human being, and typically that's like a real vulnerable one with our sponsor. It's almost more vulnerable than your intimate relationship, even if you're in a marriage, right? So that relationship needs to be consummated and then built, and then that trust and vulnerability is the basis of a longevity, long-term relationship with that sponsor, that person, or at least that's the catalyst so they can build that with other people. Thank you for tuning in to the UDRcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARDLIFE to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.